have the pleasure of introducing this brother who is so impactful in the work that he is doing, but only not just in his work, but just also as an individual. So we are blessed to have him as a keynote speaker. And so without further ado, let me introduce to you Dr. Kareem Edward, who is an assistant professor of learning technologies at Drexel University School of Education and also serves as the co-director of the Informal Learning Linking Engineering, Science, and Technology, or the ILLEST Lab. His research explores how design, understood as a cultural, creative, and communal practice, intersects informal STEM education and children's media to support meaningful knowledge transfer across learning environments. Further, his work examines how storytelling, co-creation, and community-centered design cultivate belonging, purpose, and imagination. Through initiatives such as the Black Male Animation Lab, Dr. Edward reframes STEM as a site for cultural creation and collective care. His liberatory co-design framework investigates how collaborative making can transform educational systems while expanding representation and access. In the Sneaker Lab, he explores how design, material science, and cultural meaning shape identity and innovation. As a co-founding member of the Grind Initiative, he examines how sports, data, and technology can foster community-driven STEM engagement. And Dr. Edward also brings his co-liberatory design vision into children's STEM media. Drawing from his early career as a music video and commercial director, he integrates academic research with creative production. As executive producer of MayNERD's Wild World of Science, YouTube Kids, something my children watch, built from scratch, and creative producer of Work It Out Wombats on PBS KIDS, he uses media as a conduit for STEM learning, ensuring that cultural expression and imagination and values remain at the heart of children's educational content. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Kareem Edwards.
Peace and good morning, folks. I'm going to jump right into it because we got a lot to cover. But before we do that, I want to give a big shout to my advisor. I see you, Dr. Bridget Barron. So her work in thinking about how we engage both media and co-viewing practice really helps set the ground conversation for what I've done, particularly in bridging academic research and media production. So I just wanted to make sure to send some love and some gratitude to Dr. Barron for all the work that she has provided me in this space. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right into it and we're going to get cooking. So right off the bat, I know I have a little bit of time to frame this, but I want to make sure that we leave some space for folks to ask some questions. Because I'm in full screen, I can't see your questions, but I'll make sure to jump into it and we'll push from there. So today we're going to talk a little bit about making STEM media. And the anchor for me is play. I'll discuss a little bit more what play looks like within the context of STEM media, but that's really the vibe and the energy that we're trying to share today. So to jump things off, I consider myself a two-sport athlete. When I was growing up, I'm old. I just look young, but I'm 44 years old. And there was an athlete for me that epitomized being able to do two things at the same time. And whether the brother was playing on a gridiron at a 12 o'clock game and then took a helicopter and flew across the city to play in a World Series, Deion Sanders really epitomized to me what it means to not only bring excellence, but to also to continue that passion in two different places. And then for me as a learning scientist, and you think about the interdisciplinary nature of things, this is really what grounds me, not only culturally, but then is exemplar for me. So to kind of start things off, for me, primarily, I'm a professor of learning sciences and technology and STEM education at Drexel University. And I'm also the co-director with my brother, Dr. Christopher Wright, And part of the work that we do at the ILLEST is thinking about one particular space, the informal STEM space. And I'll give you a little story that kind of grounds as why informal STEM space is important to me. For me, growing up, I was always told that when being a Black male, particularly in gifted spaces, that I was asked not to break anything. And that always stuck with me. I always wanted to create a space that would break some of that pain that I felt as a young man who tested into gifted environments, but was very limited in how I moved. Where I particularly was able to learn and engage in those spaces were informal STEM spaces. So many moons ago, there used to be an organization called the Technology Student Association, TSA. And there was also another organization called US First, which now is called First. And those were the spaces that I was able to engage and kind of build not only my identity, but then my confidence within STEM spaces. But then something else that really stepped into my framing, as I discuss about STEM media, is really being a latchkey kid, coming home, popping the lock, sitting in front of the TV and watching Discovery Channel, TLC, and really paying attention to how STEM media and in that space in my living room was really an opportunity for me to learn, which then leads into, for me, the second sport that I play. So I develop and create children's media, and I've been fortunate to do it, particularly from one space. I started off as a music video and commercial director in the early 2000s. And part of that work, going to film school and really learning and understanding what it means to develop and create within the lens, I started to better understand, number one, how important narrative was in creating worlds. And then also, too, making sure to have diverse representation and voices within those spaces. So here I'm the executive producer on a YouTube kids show called MayNERD's Wild World of Science. I'm also the co-creator and executive producer of Built from Scratch, creative producer with my wonderful, very beautiful wife, and co-creative producer on Work It Out Wombats. And part of that work that we do is really thinking about how does children in early STEM media helps impact two things: engagement and particularly seeing diverse representation within STEM media. Now, let's first start off with the first bit of work. So the framing of this conversation will look and how I look at creating a home space, a safe space for young people, particularly the young folk in, and I'm going to try this. I'm going to see if you folks are going to type it in the chat. In West Philadelphia, let's see what happens in the chat. So Drexel is located in West Philly. So in West Philadelphia, as I can see, the chat is starting to fire up a little bit. I'm able to bring and build a space where being able to create a safe environment, particularly in STEM spaces, is at the center of the work that we do. And particularly in those spaces, what I write about in this article here, just released in Science Education, is how do we build an opportunity for two things. One, for young people from the West Philadelphia community to be able to have voice, to share narrative stories within their community. And the second, that's most important, what are the computational tools that are at their access to be able to craft and build those stories? So we frame the home space around bell hooks, is conversation around homeplace, and how bell hooks frames the discourse that's very important to the work in PACE is really thinking about how to create a nurturing environment, how to creating a fulfilling environment that does two very particular things. I'm writing a paper with Dr. Kia Hammond, and our framing when I engage with Kia is around thriving. So that's the first thing. We're moving past joy and really thinking about how to put this joy into a thriving space, which then becomes actionable. The second thing that becomes important when thinking about home space is really building community. So it's one thing to design a space where individuals are able to find themselves and be generative, but it's another more important thing to build a space where, as I always say, all the homies could come through and they themselves could build in this home space and thrive. So part of that is the PACE model. So this is right off the presses, we cooking it up. And PACE really does something that's very clear. We take relational discourse, right? And how we build this like relational environment of being able to not only have the physical space, curricula, design opportunities, and leadership be in this space, but then it thinks about joy, resiliency, and then creative authorship. But then the one important thing, which then ties all of this together, which is at the heart of this discourse, is what does storytelling look like? What does it look like to give young people an opportunity to take these competencies, particularly in these STEM spaces, and really engage in this generative activity and work? The other thing too is I share here some of the young people that are in our space is really thinking about if the home space or the environment not only takes these young people, and particularly in the work we do for young men in West Philadelphia, how do we get them to come in as their whole self, to not only be their whole self, but then also create opportunities for this transgenerational engagement for the young people that they mentor and for other folks that come into the space, particularly professionals that are that I'll share later that are in animation and filmmaking that work. But how do we get young people to show up as themselves? So part of that is some work that I wrote earlier that thinks about creating an open learning environment. So it's two things. Number one, at the ILLEST Lab, we have 7 stations, right? So we got the sneaker lab where we do material science. We also have a space where we have the animation, voiceover. We have a modular manufacturing space. And each one of those spaces comes down to, again, as I said, I'm an old person. I used to read these books called Choose Your Adventure. And part of choosing your adventure was at any point in time as you were engaging, you're able to go to a space where you can continue the story, right? So for us, we look at transferring competencies. So if you start off with the sneaker lab, because that's really where your primary entry space is, you could take that and transfer it over to the animation lab. You go to the animation lab, you go to the music production. So it's really this space where the agency really starts off with building how young people not only see themselves, but what they want to come in initially to start building. The other thing that I want to be very clear about, particularly as I work with Black boys, is this opportunity to build play. For Black men and particularly Black boys, we age them very quickly. And allowing them a space where they are able to not only play, but to openly be themselves, where they're not judged, where they're not criticized, absolutely becomes important. I shared this story that for me, again, I'm 44 years old. So I remember watching Transformers in 1984, 85, and being absolutely transfixed by Optimus Prime and the animation, which was early anime. And finding that the young people that I engage with today who are watching Transformers 1 and Prime are also bridging this conversation with Optimus Prime with me. So there's this cultural bridge that's happening that we're finding through not only the act of play, but then also the animation that we're watching, which then sets a larger discussion for later in our animation lab. I also want to share something very quick about the young men that you've seen. I talk about asking them to show up and just be themselves. And I say that the most important thing in our lab is that we don't want you to perform. Performative demonstrations of what you know as far as STEM and who you are is not important to me. What I'm looking for you is to not only show up, but to show out and be yourself. Because we're in Philly, I'll use the language of my young Philly folks. We keep it a bean in there. The energy that you bring within the West Philadelphia community from 51st all the way up, go ahead and bring that down at 3401 Market Street. And in that space, as you get to share and be yourself, there's a piece of that engagement. Carol Lee talks about that in the cultural modeling discussion, is that bringing the outside, right, of the community within these spaces, and not only designing it with curricula, but then also designing it within how young people are engaging. And for my students, particularly in the ILLEST Lab, I just ask them to be themselves. And part of being themselves also translates to them being able to be very direct and clear mentors, and then create aspirational engagement for the young people that they work into the space. And part of that, again, is I bring it into a framework of this generational space, is really thinking about how my elementary, middle school, high school, undergrad, graduate, postdoc, and professionals I bring in from the community all work together on the same project. And what we find is that our elementary school students are just as knowledgeable of the animation and the sneaker spaces as our high school students. And this is all part of building this community, particularly of having a large group of Black boys and Black men collectively working together and sharing expertise. And also, what ends up happening is that these young men end up building bonds that they could then be able to support each other, not only within this space, but out into the community. And then, as I show you this picture here, we make sure that even at the university space at the ILLEST, that we're not just limiting our engagement in the West Philadelphia community to just a middle school, high school. We go all the way back to elementary school because it's important to matriculate. There are about 5 or 6 students that have started in the ILLEST Lab from an elementary to middle school that ended up becoming students at Drexel and also becoming members of the ILLEST Lab. So the research that I do, not only I make sure that it is very engaging in the discussion of culturally responsive engagement, but then there's also this opportunity that we don't just take data from young people so we can write papers and chase tenure. It's also about making sure that there are opportunities for those young students who are in our spaces and in our research can also be able to engage in the fruits and the spaces in which we come from. So now I want to share a little bit of the work that we're doing, which is at the crux here, and how media creation looks. So part of this is here is a young man who is from the West Philadelphia community, which I'll share later in some of our animation labs. So part of what we do in our modular manufacturing lab is we have animation that takes 2 positions. One, to be able to do physical stop motion. Two, the computational and logarithmic work of doing stop motion animation. And part of that fuses into my own work is now we switch sports and what it looks like to create and develop content. So part of that research work then feeds into my own animation company, which is Old Greens Group. And the work that I've built with my partner, Dr. Darlene Edouard, is really looking about how can we build STEM content, not only that is fortified based on the academic research that we do, but then also that fuels directly into children media pipeline. And this is some of the work as far as the framework that we build within the work that we do at Old Greens. And that work really does 2 very particular conversations. How do we harness this engagement? And then really, what does it look like to have long-term knowledge retention? And that's really part of the hustle of being a learning scientist, right? Figuring out schemas, short to long-term retention, right? And that's the work that I see for me as when I was a young person watching TLC, watching Discovery Channel, and paying attention to those David Attenborough films, right? That gave me the opportunity for me to get a long-term understanding of STEM engagement in science, particularly in those videos. I wanted to do the same kind of work, but then make sure to have diverse representation in the content that we create. So some of the partners that I've consulted or we've consulted in designing curriculum have gone on to be very impactful across children's media. And that's one of the things that becomes very important is that I wanted to make sure that what we do with the ILLEST Lab and then the work that we do publicly has the largest amount of footprint, but it takes 2 levels, right? So in West Philadelphia, I've never advertised to ask students to come through. It's always word of mouth. You teach one, they bring everybody along. And the same thing in the work that I do in children's media. One work leads to the other, but there is a consistency in not only the language, but then also a consistency in the ethos of what we're building towards children's media. So now let's get down to the brass tacks of it. So myself and my wife are the creative producers of Work It Out Wombats. And we've been working on this show, I think like 5 years now. And Zadie, Malik, and Zeke are part of this framework and this ethos of trying to deliver computational learning and engagement for ages 2 to 5. Just quickly as a hustle, we got 31 million views, and we're the #1 show for the age group of 2 to 5. We're trying to be out here hustling for ages 7 to 9, but Daniel Tiger got us pinned down, and you ain't beating Daniel Tiger anytime soon, but I'm coming for you though. But all jokes aside, it's been very fulfilling to build this show because my daughter, who's also a named character on the show, has been watching this process and has been learning along while we're writing scripts and building characters. And part of designing the Treeberhood is thinking about how do we create opportunities for not only computational learning through activities around logic, retention, memory, and engagement, but then create these cultural framings and these lenses where these characters provide these nuances of culture for the viewers who are watching them. So part of that longer discussion, which has been able to kind of sweep its way through the show, is really thinking about the impact of STEAM media. I'm making sure to say STEAM media, not STEM media, because that's really the most important discourse that we need to have. The arts are absolutely a foundational part of how we need to look as engaging young people within this space. And part of the arts in creating animation and building in part of these children animation frameworks does two things. Number one, this co-viewing framework of having parents, right, like us, who are, I guess we're old millennials, very young Gen Xers, who grew up in the 80s, late 70s and 80s, watching animation and being part of that. But then also the second thing that becomes very important is making sure to meet young people where they are. So part of that for me, I am Haitian, c'est haïtien. Le premier langue parlée, c'est créole. And part of me being a proud Haitian is thinking about the integration, right, of how we could design characters to make sure that they're culturally relevant within these spaces. So Devante J. Squirrel, Marie, and Jean-Michel. Marie is named after my mom. Jean-Michel is named after both my dad and Jean-Michel Basquiat, is really this love letter, right, to Haitians to see themselves reflected on screen. But then at the same time, Devante is a young man, or a young squirrel, I should say, who engages in the creation station at in the Treeberhood. And part of that is looking at the activities and the work that I do at the ILLEST Lab, but then also is to make sure that Lako and Duffy, who are in the Treeberhood and who run the creation station, are part of this mentorship model while helping this young squirrel be able to engage. And just as a side note, I see a couple of my Stanford homies in there. Devante represents the black squirrels that we used to have running around on Campus Drive. So part of it is making sure that I took all the lived experiences of my life and fused it in the designing of Devante. As another side note, the family shows up in a tap tap. I'm absolutely proud to say that this tap tap is one of the first representation of this traditional Haitian vehicle that's found in children American media. And that's part of just the consistent work that I see as being able to show up as myself in creating children's media, but then at the same time, being able to give young people two things: an opportunity to engage in these STEM competencies, but then also the opportunity to see and be a part of other cultures. So with that, I want to share a little bit of the STEM work that we do on the show.
Devante, can you help us?
What you've got there is just cream with ice, not ice cream.
How do we fix this?
The ice doesn't go inside the container with the cream and sugar. If you put it inside, it'll melt and make the sugary cream all watery.
Oh!
The ice needs to go outside the container. Here's a plan. Put the ice in here, in the space between the containers.
Oh!
You've got this. I'll be fine-tuning my laundry if you need any more help.
So part of
Hey, Devante, can you help?
So part of this, I want to be very clear, is that animals are not a proxy for race. And I want to be absolutely clear about this. As we've built cultural frameworks within the Treeberhood, and we've had very cultural representations within the Treeberhood, which has been an absolute privilege working with PBS. As we know, they've been defunded, but they're still fighting on as a member of the PBS family. I stand tall with folks. There's still a conversation to be had that as young people are engaging with STEM media, they also need to have very clear representation that allows them for aspirational framing. So then comes in MayNERD's Wild World of Science. I'm very proud to be a part of not only the co-creation with MayNERD, but then also producing it with my partner, Dr. Darlene Edouard, as thinking about what does it look like to have STEM communicators that reflect the community. I'm not gonna lie, again, Mr. Wizard, because I'm old, right? Mr. Wizard was the best. Beekman's World was the best. But we all know who the head cheese in the game is, right? And you'll go ahead and start typing Bill, 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 Bill. And I love me some Bill Nye, the science guy. But at the same time, as we think of the 30-year impact that Bill has had, there needs to be a conversation of how do we have more diverse representation in science communication, right? So Emily's Wonders Lab is a very wonderful representation that Netflix was able to pick up and to show during COVID. And then now we're thinking about how, particularly on our show, do we have this impact to show science communication, not only for a new generation of folks, but then also on a disaggregated platform as terrestrial regular forms of science media has changed significantly. We're also very proud of the show. We just hit our 7 millionth view this month when we starting to become very successful. We're getting calls from folks and reaching out saying that, look, this is an opportunity for our young people, particularly in our communities, to be able to not only see themselves, but then also to engage in activities because we have curricula that are tied to each episode. And part of that is also the love and care that we do within these spaces. So I want to be clear. In the first sport as an academic, I put in a great deal amount of work as far as like not only the teaching, constructing, and building these spaces, but I also went to film school. So part of that level of clear development and processing comes in our film production. So we didn't want MayNERD to just be a show where we're pulling up a smart device, smart camera device. We built stages, we built spaces so that we can give our Black students and our Black people an opportunity to see HD, 4K, high level content that they'd be proud to not only see, but then to also to share. And we have a myriad of guests that come into these spaces. But one of the things that becomes important as connected to our show, the Wombats, and then here is the consistency of how we share content. So here's a little snippet of our episodes.
We're going to pour about 2 cups or so of ice into this big Ziploc bag. For this next step, we're going to add something special to this ice, okay? And that is salt, okay? So we're going to put about half a cup of salt into our ice. And now, next step, take our smaller Ziploc bags and we're going to put that inside our big Ziploc bag.
Okay.
Make sure we get as much air out of it as we can after you close it up. This is where your gloves come in because we're going to shake up our mixture in our hands for about 5 to 7 minutes, okay?
Oh.
So it's going to get pretty cold. You don't want to freeze your fingers off, okay? And you just want to mix this up like such, okay? Mix it up, give it a nice shake, okay? And you want to make sure you get a good workout, okay? We want to sweat. The salt does something really special, okay? Salt actually lowers the freezing point, and so that enables our little mixture in there to get really, really cold, really, really fast. I think we gotta do a little dance while we're doing this. A little shake dance. Whew. I don't know about your hands, but my hands are pretty cold. We're gonna open it up. And if we did this right, we should have a nice, frozen, delicious treat. Look at that.
Wow.
Isn't that cool? Look at that, our own ice cream. Should we do an official taste test?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
This is really good.
Oh,
Hold on.
that is delicious. Our very own vanilla ice cream.
Wow.
DIY
this is awesome.
in our laboratory kitchen. Yes.
So part of the work that we're doing
We're going to
on
pour
MayNERD,
about 2 cups or so.
we've seen this one already. Let's go on. So part of that work that's being done, not only in the Wombats, but MayNERD and my other shows, is trying to do something that's very clear. I'm bringing the energy of some previous labs that I engaged with. Dr. Brian Brown, I was a part of his Science in the City lab, which looks to bring in not only direct science engagement to underserved communities in Oakland and nationally, but then also to make sure that young people can see themselves aspirationally, particularly our Black boys, within these science and STEM spaces. So MayNERD, as a science communicator for 20 years, is just a natural extension of building a space to be not a replacement of Bill, but to also be an additional to the larger tapestry of what science communication looks like. So now we're going to jump into a little bit of research and bring this thing on home. So switching back to my next sport, some of the work that I directly wanted to engage in is really thinking about now, what does it look like to have young people create STEM videos? What does it look like for young people to be able to build the same level of content that I'm building in my other sport within the ILLEST Lab? So part of that is the work that I do, which is framed under the liberatory co-design. So the idea is extending what we think of co-design, but then centering it on young people and having them do two particular things. Number one, that they're the ones that are the drivers of narrative. And number two, that they bring in the expertise, the computational literacies around the tools that they already have expertise in to be able to design and build. So we're going to jump right into it. So I got a 6-week pilot program that I ran in 2023, which was a summer cohort of young folk that we were looking to design, fabricate, and build stop motion characters to make a very quick short, 3-minute short. And part of that in that design framing is two things, right? Number one, being able to for them to engage the play. So the Transformers was part of it, right? And then second, be able to actually fabricate and design. So we have the modular manufacturing space, table saw, bandsaw, 3D printer, an assortment of tools to be able to get that building part, right? And then also too, what does it look like to write a script, to do voiceover, to do raps? A whole bunch of part of this steps is also part of a career trajectory pathway. So I wanted to extend all the professional knowledge that I have in my animation and then also live action work, but bring it within the ILLEST Lab so that way young people can see which one of these jobs or these opportunities that they feel connected to what they potentially wanted to look as a career opportunity. The thing to think about is also what self-expression looks like. So for many of these young men in the West Philadelphia community, they were into manga, anime, and all myriads of animation, which was different from the stereotypes we tend to place, particularly on Black men when it comes to sports, when it comes to other versions of expression. And these young men wanted to have a very intentional discourse of wanting to create not only the media, the animation media, that they particularly wanted to voice from this anime manga space, but then they also wanted to also show that they had previous engagements in small media creation using their cell phones on social media. Now, the other thing to really think about is what does it look like to be part of the means of production? So as we a lot of times talk about as educators, so I was in kindergarten all the way up to high school teacher. We talk about agency for young people, but it tends to be a top-down curriculum work. So I wanted to think about what would it be to bring these young folks within these spaces as we have the open learning environment and have them start the process of designing. So the first step up directly was to start creating their 3D files and their designs. As we wanted to do some rapid ideation, they were able to pull some STL files that already had been pre-designed, but it also helped them as a demo to start modeling the work that they wanted to engage in. And then they got to the business of printing. Now, as you can see on this screen, there are pieces, right? And very early, as these young men were super excited to start printing, it dawned on them very quickly they needed to print and then assemble all of these pieces. So as they started to build and start to construct these pieces, then they started to think about how they would do lighting and set design. So part of that was also the fabrication part. And there's always a connection not only between creating these characters to stop motion, but many of these young men wanted to get into the toy industry. So this was also a nice little bridge point for them to start fabricating. As you can see, they have the Master Sword and Link Shield. So those were also some of the additional print jobs that they were doing that they would incorporate later in their designs. So as we start thinking about the data collection process, we wanted to do a couple of things. Real-time collection of data, the actual materials that they were organizing and developing, and then also capturing their films. And this is some of the stuff they had to do in this process as I kind of get through it. So they had to do lighting design, voiceover, editing, rigging, digital physical workflow, and iterative design. So this wasn't just about them as them just wanting to just make short stories. They had to be part of all means of production, which would happen sometimes on independent animation spaces. As I shared here, how we've collected some data and we coded not only their journals, but then also the different iterations of them producing content and some of the screencasts that they would grab during the actual process, right? So we captured their CAD designs and then we captured their editing design process as they're doing the showcase. So this is the first week as far as fabrication and exploration. So we had to get through the printing and design process. And boy, was it fun. What they had to learn first was the fact that as they were printing these different models, the tensile strength, right? The wear and tear of these different transformer parts was very important. So we had to use different densities of spools for two particular things. One, to be able to sand off and put paint on them, and for them to have long-term rigidity. Then the other thing that was important was for them to actually sit down and to assemble it. And it became a process for them, but it also was rewarding for them as they were building it, just like it would Gauge and Legos. And this is some of our students just engaging in just the assembly. They had to stand, file, and assemble together. So again, this was a very direct STEM engagement process. So the next part was actually doing the rigging and bringing the characters of life. So as they would model these characters, now the next thing to do was to start to move. So we did some practices with pre-designed characters. So these are Transformers actually from the 80s, which cost a pretty penny. We should have just bought the regular ones from Target, and I don't know why. But we went ahead and got the 80s joints. And this was fun because it was, again, a connection between myself and these students to be able to have a very nostalgic engagement within those spaces. But one of the things I want to hold here on a frame, because I know we're coming up on time, but I want to hold this space right here, is that we created the home space. There was always food there. There was always a time for them to kind of debrief and talk, which then led to very generative conversations and generative spaces. So again, the students had to learn how to light these spaces and really think about what this fabrication looked like when you had to light it and put it on camera. And then finally, there's the actual filming and to making of the animation. So I'm going to jump to the animation, but this is how it looked when they started to merge some of the fabricated weaponry or designs with pre-designed cameras or pre-designed characters. And this is just one of the larger, wider views of the engagement. So now I'm just going to play you a little snippet of the raps and the short film that they did, and then we'll close it out and try to open it up for a bit of question before we leave.
Riding got the touch on my beat. Start screaming, I lead and ride with them seekers in my fleet. Yeah, team and I'm a prime when we roll out on the street. We all more kind of crazy body stalking Cybertronian. I make the tracks, set the cons, we always on the podium. I'm brittle with my plastic, but you know I got no gold in it. 20 steps, twist and turn the modes, I change, I'm folding in. I transform.
So this was also content that was created. As you can see the smile on these young men's faces. They had never done this before. And for them to do this in such a small amount of time and to transfer the knowledge that they had and to bring it within the space was something that is absolutely generative. And I just want to show you just some of the things that these young people were saying, not only in their journals, but what they were thinking about, right? So they thought about being able to tell a story now using this method, right? Being able to design and to be the leads, the same way that I do on my own shows. The other thing too that really stood out to me is that thinking about what it means to imagine now. So now they have access to not only this knowledge, this computational knowledge of using these tools, these narrative tools, but then also wrapping it up to all the STEM competencies that they learn. This to me seems very generative for these young people. And being able to say to themselves that I can do this if I have access to these tools. So then we think about how we at the lab, we're also being able to bridge this at their school, not only to give the school access to the equipment that we have, but them to continue engaging it. And then this is one of the things that stood out to me is that being able to do lab work. So it's one thing I want to leave you all with as we close it out. It's very important to design these labs where young people feel that not only are they benefiting from it, but then more importantly, there's something moving forward. Just doing another marshmallow bridge isn't going to cut it now. We have very sophisticated young people in these communities that want to engage in activities that they can see themselves not only being a part of, being able to translate it. And here's how I'll close it out.
It looks good.
Yeah, it looks good. I actually like that. Yeah.
Why do you like it?
The end of it, going off of how I was taught about moving the camera, the angles, basically like an actual like scene. Yeah. Yeah.
Let me ask you a quick question. Are y'all proud of yourselves?
Yes.
Why?
I feel like I did well with this one. Because this is I feel like this is better than the first one I made. Yeah.
All right.
So I want to leave you with this. So this was a picture that was sent to me by his teacher at school. I didn't ask him to do this. So he volunteered. And I'll just say this, when he showed up to our program for about 3.5 weeks, he kept his hoodie on. If y'all are educators, you know those students that keep their hoodie on clenched tight. And by the end of the whole process, this is what he looked like. And the teacher sent me this quick little snap. And she said to me that he broke down all the steps. Again, I never asked him to do this. And more importantly, I didn't know he was writing these steps down. And what became very impactful for me is that not only did he understand the means of production, but he felt very compelled to show it to his classmates, which he later invited 4 or 5 of his classmates, and including the cousin, to come into the lab to engage. So as I leave you with this work, I want to be very clear about something, is that being, particularly for me, one of the few Black men that are in children's media at the executive level creating content, I find that it's very important. 2 things. Number one, to create legacy. So building opportunities for these young men so they can replace me. And more importantly, to continue to bridge the academic work that I'm doing at the ILLEST Lab and what I'm writing and publishing as an opportunity to take those in the academic spaces and those that are applying it in the producing and production space to create opportunities for not only inspirational, aspirational framing of STEM media, but then also to be able to create language and for young people to want to not only be a part of it, but also to see themselves. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share with you. Open it up for any conversation if we have a little bit of time yet. I thank you all for being able to see this work that we've been engaging with. Peace.
Thank you. No words other than immense gratitude for the work that you're doing and doing it with the community and not on the community. And so I appreciate you bringing that representation and access and authenticity to everything that you do. I think in the interest of time, we don't really have space for questions, but I do think that thank you for dropping your email in the chat for folks. I certainly encourage folks to reach out if you do have inquiries and questions. And so we are blessed. We are blessed to have you kick us off for the day.